Now, there are many examples of this, whether it be the censoring or sanitization of LGBTQ plus characters in various movies or shows, from live action to animated, to dumbing down a topic, to not address the actual criticism that is being said, or just bizarre changes that make no sense being there. And granted, some of these we could talk about individually in the future, but I think I want to I think I want to start off with something a little bit different before we get into the notorious example. Now, production changes doesn't always mean a bad thing. It really depends on the context. Like if the studio listens to the feedback from the audience, which results in a delay in the project, but at the same time, it shows that they actually care about the project. And I think you, Dryw, mentioned about an example of this prior to this discussion.
Yeah, so obviously this was about 2019. Around that it happened, we had that first trailer for the Sonic movie, and the first design obviously it has a lot of negative comments. It was not, it was okay. It was definitely not appealing. It wasn't very Sonic-like. It was very much I'm trying to get the right word. I it just when people think of Sonic, just you didn't really think like you look at the live action appearance for him, it just did not look like him. So what I actually still really appreciate all these years later, and it's great that we have all these kind of more like not lore accurate, but like visually coherent, visually similar designs. Is they had a Sonic fan artist or Sonic like he did more like comedy type stuff or like crap post type stuff, Tyson Heese, and he's been working with Paramount and some of the other like Sonic projects for a long time now. And they changed the design for movie Sonic to be a lot more visually accurate to what we usually think of Sonic. So instead of like obviously they couldn't do the brow with the mono eye type thing. So they had to do like the bridging, like the nose bridge part, which, looking at the original design, I can kind of see is like, well, they didn't want to do the eye bridge. They didn't want to do that weird like mono eye. So, that I can understand. There was like some parts that they wanted to do, but he had tiny hands, tiny feet, all that kind of stuff. Not a lot of people like that design. So it is good that like Paramount saw this. They all saw the negative reaction and they were like, okay, we have to do this. We have to change this so people actually like it. Obviously, we're like three movies in. I'm pretty sure we just got confirmation for a fourth movie. Actually, I think it's currently filming as we speak, and everybody loves it. Like, even I'm in the camp of it's slightly a joke, but also slightly serious. Sonic 3 was peak. I don't care what other people say. So, that is a good thing of like when studios are actually listening is and hearing like all these criticisms. I do have like a counterpoint to this because it is a current it's kind of a current hot topic. It's kind of dying down, which I'm kind of glad it's kind of dying down because it's a little annoying. I'll bring it up a little bit later though.
It's good to have a production company there when you need to budget your film and you need to have a scheduled shooting time because we've seen a lot of movies where they go over budget and they don't do well, or they're like, oh, we need more time, more time, more time with something, and they're like, well, you've been limited this amount of time, and if you're given a limited amount of time and a limited amount of budget, you need to stick with that. One of the things when I tried going to film school, one of the things that pre-production teacher said it there was it is better to be under budget than over budget.
Yeah, unfortunately, we just do see a lot of those where they just where as a result of being over budget, it all just becomes more flash than substance.
Yeah.
Now that we're kind of getting into that, unfortunately, I mean, we can always go back to like good examples of this, but now that we're kind of getting into it now, however, sometimes delaying a project doesn't always mean that it becomes the end product doesn't always become good. Like if they either they add too much or they add nothing at all, like nothing happens to the point where people lose interest in it. And you see this a lot with projects that sometimes suffer from scope creep, which essentially is when a project it has a vision, but they don't know, but they just keep adding stuff that ultimately conflict with what they want to do.
And I think that, and I love, all these like big blockbuster movies. I'm going to be honest, I was excited because they just released they were, I did not watch that whole live. It was like 5 hours of them showing cast chairs for like all this new Avengers movie. I'm not gonna sit through a 5 hour live of all that. But I will say that it does kind of seem in a lot more like recent any just blockbusters in general, I think are so focused more on IP like than
Yeah.
story that unfortunately, and you mentioned this about scope, and this kind of goes into some of these bigger blockbusters that are trying to do either trying to the like look at the multiversal saga, or like you get some of these other like big like blockbuster movies that are released recently. We were talking about the Electric State earlier, or like we were talking about like some of these other or big movies that have all recognizable characters. Look at give me a second. Look at the Space Jam 2. There was a litany of characters that were licensed that belonged to Warner Brothers. And unfortunately, that movie was very much product over substance. Like it kind of just it was very shallow. Yeah, I watched the original movie. It was very much basketball movie, but with the Looney Tunes. But there was something in that. And unfortunately, there we've gotten to the point, a post like Avengers Endgame type point, where some of these studios want to basically be like, yeah, I mean, yes, Endgame had this kind of thing where it's like this was kind of being built up, and they are trying to build it up. I think that it's just kind of, I don't want to say it's stagnating, but you know, there's become the point where we have all of these franchises. It's not just Disney or Marvel, although I say Disney. Another great example of look at all the stuff that we own, unfortunately, is Wreck-It Ralph 2. I love the first movie, but that the second movie just became, hey guys, we know what memes are, and look at all the stuff that we own. Here's a Disney Online with all the stuff that we own, and hey, we'll make jokes about current, or actually, it was actually even when the movie came out, some of those memes are like long and gone, dead, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's
It
just
feels more, it felt more like, how do you do, fellow kids?
yeah. So, that might not be scope, but a lot
But
of it
it's
is
more,
kind of
oh, sorry. It's more like, I was just going to add on to that point that it feels this over reliance on IP is more so just trend chasing. I mean, some could argue that all of this really started because of The Force Awakens.
it's
Like,
a lot. Yeah, it's a lot of it is kind of a marketing type thing or whatever. They want to, bring the old actors back, bring like 70-year-old Mark Hamill, 80-year-old Harrison Ford. Well, at the time, 70-year-old Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill, all that kind of stuff. They're bringing back these older actors who, should be retired. They shouldn't have to be forcing themselves to be in these like big movies for like until they're 90 to quote another movie. You know, it sometimes, as much as I like seeing a character come back from not playing a like an actor come back from playing a character that they played like 5, 10 years ago, you don't need to see like they just announced Sir Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart as Professor X and Magneto for this new Avengers movie. These guys are 90, I think like 90 some in their early 90s. Like I got like I love these movies. I love the characters that they played 20 plus years ago, but these guys, they're going to have to kill them off. They're going to like have to kill them off. They're going to have to kill this movie. Whole universe has to be a reset because, and I've kept saying this, is the MCU's the biggest issue. It's not like representation. It's not like poor storytelling. It's mostly time
Yeah.
because you have a media that has a floating timeline where characters can be in their 20s in the 1960s, the 1980s, the 2000s, and the 2020s. Or like some characters were like adults in the 70s, but retroactively they were adults no, they weren't adults in the 90s. They were kids in the 90s, and now they're adults in the 2020s. Like this is a big problem is, when we have some of these movies that set a time period for all this stuff to happen, and now we have movies that are like being made 2, 3, 4 years apart, and some of these actors are getting visibly older. They showed up in the movie, but they're getting visibly older. You have Tom Holland Spider-Man was in No Way Home, I think almost like what, 5 years ago, almost three, no, 4 years ago, 4 years ago, 2021. And he's my age. He's 3 months younger than me. I just turned 29. And we can we can talk about that later. I just turned 29. He is turning 29 in 3 months. So he's not getting any younger. So he's gonna be 30 before like the new like anytime he's gonna be Spider-Man again. So, we have to it's just kind of that's the biggest issue, and that's why we need to have this huge reset. So we're not having actors play these characters until they literally are like keeling over.
And that's not even to mention that the studios then start using AI to literally manipulate the dead to keep the same old song and dance all over again. And at that point, I think we really need to stop. Like, just stop with this.
It's a lot of nostalgia banging, is what it is, too.
Yeah.
So.
And a lot of it is like desperation at this point.
That's true too. And sometimes when like these other studios, especially like Netflix, like the problem I have with Netflix is that they just don't want to finish anything. They start something, they get a couple seasons or so, and then they never finish. That's one of the concerns I have because a friend of mine and I were talking about um wanting to see adaptations of, and even my brother has said it too, that you know we want to see adaptations of like the Chronicles of Narnia series, but we want to see it just get all 7 stories done. And if they and which is why I'm a little nervous about Netflix doing Narnia is because what if they don't finish the series? Sure they got the rights to all 7 books, but that doesn't mean that they're gonna finish the series. Is kind of my concern.
Well, problem is with Netflix is that it's the same thing with everything else. Same with everything else, almost everything else, especially with TV shows. If
Hmm.
it's not an instant success within the first 2 seasons, it's a failure. They're going to cut it entirely. They're just going to stop production of it, which is really depressing.
And I think that this went from a kind of a studio meddling or like production problems is now like it also has to also come down to audience reception. And I think sadly with the age of the internet,
Mhm.
10 years ago, like back in the Tumblr days, the 2010s, um, there was, you know, it was mostly just people were screaming into a void of like saying, "Oh, this show is terrible," or whatever, or I love this project. And some of these shows could go for like 5, 6, 12 seasons or whatever. And that was like how it was for like 20 plus years prior. But now, I mean, obviously we had some shows that only lasted like one episode, but that was just because the way if it was actually crap, then you would know it was actually crap or just it was not feasible to do at the time. But now you get some of these shows, they're actually great shows, like wonderful shows or have great ideas. But in the age of the internet, when there's not like instant gratification or like something to kind of like keep tapping at like the neurons for somebody, you're gonna have people that just review bomb stuff because they have like some worldview that like they don't like these type of people, they don't like these type of characters. So obviously this show is bad. And unfortunately, we get it in cases. There was a couple. I don't want to just keep bringing up superhero media. I'm trying not to, but I liked the She-Hulk series. I'll say that.
Mhm.
But there is this subsection of the internet full of people who are fragile and kind of insecure, not kind of insecure, completely insecure about themselves. That when they see a woman, a strong, independent woman, or a strong woman, they're like, "Oh, I don't like this. This is bad." It's, yeah, I just, we need to kind of get over, these people need to get over themselves, and we need to kind of get over ourselves and actually look and see, is it actually bad? Is it bad because that we're angry because it doesn't have us in it? Or is it actually bad because it has terrible storytelling or terrible this or that? Like the media literacy or all this kind of stuff, we actually people need to actually take the time to actually consume it and not just hate watch it or hate it because it does not reflect my ideology. Actually give it a chance.
Mhm.
And this actually sort of in a way brings back to another idea that all the way back of how one of the things that corporations and as we also mentioned, the audience sometimes will do is they'll trend chase. They will trend chase whatever something is popular and then they'll do basically what everyone else is doing superficially so they could get attention about it. And specifically with corporations, it's a larger issue as they're always trying to bank off of something quickly before that bubble inevitably bursts. It's unfortunately another lucrative way to make money. Of course, corporations always trying to find lucrative ways to make money has always existed. But one could argue that the rapid rise of technological advancements, especially with the rate that it's going now,
Mhm.
has exacerbated the problem. And they are actively using technology to speed up that process, especially with this overabundance of CGI and all this, like just inflating, as we said mentioned before, inflating a budget just to show off, look how fancy our CGI is. It just becomes so intoxicating. And sorry to keep going on this point here, but one of the biggest examples that, in terms of corporations of trend chasing, is that they will do this thing is so dumb and stupid, and then they immediately go and do it bit. And
Yeah.
that that's just everything wrong with these mainstream studios. All they do is make a bunch of nonsensical surface level meta references to compensate for a generic movie, making it even more generic, and doesn't say anything actually insightful, but comes up more like hypocrisy and pathetic deflecting of criticism. You see this with that Chippendale Rescue Rangers movie that everybody forgot about, and some
Hmm.
of the bad adult animated content from the early 2020s. And that's the thing. Anytime they do these things, no one will remember it in the next year or so because that trend died as soon as it started, as is the finicky nature of trends. And this is why a tactic like this is just not sustainable long term. And every time they just do these things, I'm just like, why?
Well, that's
I,
true. I mean, one of the things, like, for example, how long do these, like, for example, how long do these live action Disney movies last? Like, what, 2 months, 3 months? And then it's like they're forgotten in like 2, 3 months. So
Yeah.
sometimes I forget even a live action Mulan was even made because I'm like, again, you know, I don't remember these things being made or whatever. And then it's like, oh, okay, well, oh, they did that. Oh, okay, well, I never saw it. So, eh.
Yeah. And especially with the Disney live action remakes, it's like
Mhm.
they have a much smaller pool of movies to remake than most people realize because I guarantee you they are not going to make a live action remake of the Black Cauldron.
at
Well,
least
I
not
wish,
anytime soon.
I wish someone could because the books that were inspired for that movie, that of the Black Cauldron, those books are fantastic. So I
Yeah.
really wish someone could get their hands on the rights to get those and do those books correctly. So for
Yeah.
anyone who doesn't know the title of those books, they are called the Prydain Chronicle books by Lloyd Alexander, and they're
Yeah.
fantastic. I love them.
Yeah. True.
Love them.
I'm just saying Disney won't do it. Someone else could, but Disney, I personally don't see them. I personally don't see Disney ever doing that.
I don't see them doing it either.
Yeah, they've kind of become more of a look what we have type machine nowadays than like they have been in the last like 20 or so years. Just one second. Another thing we were talking about trend chasing, which I think is really wild, is it's also kind of in the half-life of a meme, is you look at kind of a little bit more of a current thing is there was that meme going around with that guy with the really weird morning routine, which probably took about like 7 hours to film. Um, and like literally, I think it was in the span of 3 days. I think it was in less than 3 days. Duolingo did like a parody of that, and everybody is like calling them out for this. Is like these companies are trying to chase these trends. They're trying to copy some of these memes. And
Hmm.
like sometimes these companies are the reasons these like little funny haha things die is because they either don't understand it or they just don't do it in a way that sparks that type of like um imagination or just it's not as funny. Like another good one is the they were roommates meme. Disney did that. Disney did that, I believe, on their Instagram and they got that completely wrong. And they had it was Dipper and Mabel, and there was another like more like actual related people in that form of the meme. It's like, guys, I you don't understand what that meme actually means. Like you just got that on the surface level, and that's the thing about these corporations that try to cater to the modern quick dopamine hit meme market is that sometimes they only see it on the surface level and they don't actually go into or that I mean it's kind of more of a context type thing. You actually have to know the context for some of these things or even in jokes. Because if you know what the and they were roommates like meme is, you know what that implies. And to have characters that are related, or, I think also that, if I remember correctly, that meme also had Lilo and Stitch. I'm like, no, Disney, no, don't, no. So it's unfortunate too. Like, these big studios try to chase these trends, and unfortunately, sometimes they kind of kill the trends too because they understand how these trends actually work.
That's true. I mean, one of the things I will say is like, it's a matter of them just not wanting to take risks. And I think that's a real problem with these big corporations is they don't want to try something new. They don't want to take risks. I mean, these other corporations don't also understand what made them big in the first place. Think about a world that was pre-Disney. Think about a world that was pre-Star Wars, pre-Lord of the Rings, pre-Game of Thrones. I mean, I was just thinking about it the other day that like I know that like I personally am not really like a huge fan of like the Harry Potter thing, but imagine if Harry Potter was like the first show before Game of Thrones that they did a TV adaptation. Imagine if they were first. The only reason these shows are happening now is because there was a first. So when they forget, like when Disney forgets that they were the first animated feature company, when they forget about that, and then this other company forgets that they were this, bring back to who you were before is what these companies need to do.
And I'm starting to you start to kind of see it now.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, it didn't get really marketed very well. Is the day that the Earth blew up. It was the Donald and not Donald, Daffy. I don't know
Yeah,
why my brain said Donald.
that
The Daffy Duck and Porky Pig, like big alien movie just came out. And it didn't really have a lot of not fanfare, but the marketing was very slim. It was kind of more of an online marketing type thing that I seen. I
Mm-hmm.
actually heard more fans talk about it of like animation or older animation. They actually, I didn't get ads or whatever for any of these type of things, at least in a way that was like big and in my face. You don't see it on a billboard or any of that kind of stuff, or
yeah.
you didn't really see it much in theaters, or actually hearing from I'm hearing from circles that Coyote versus Acme, which got canceled, is actually getting, I think, the same studio or the same company that released The Day That the Earth Blew Up is also going to release Coyote versus Acme because I believe they bought it from Warner Brothers.
Yeah, and
So,
that's and
oh,
that's
you go
part of
ahead.
the reason, and that's part of the reason why you didn't really see any advertising for it, is because Warner Brothers took one look at it and said, "We're disowning you," because they they just have this they're just whack right now because they're focusing more on adult programming and family programming, whatever that means. I guess it doesn't involve animation, considering their treatment for the day the Earth blew up, that someone else has to take over and actually do the thing themselves. And it's sad, really. And actually, speaking of things getting replaced, I had this one other point about directors getting
Mm-hmm.
changed mid-production or mid-trilogy for movies or shows for whatever reason. Maybe they got caught doing something wrong, or they were just plain uncooperative with the cast and crew. Like, for example, uh, I may get flack for this, but I don't care. But for example, the director for the biopic movie Bohemian Rhapsody was fired two-thirds or so late in production because he was just really bad at managing family matters and filming, as he would allegedly, I say allegedly, because we'll never know 100% certain, allegedly arriving late or just straight up not showing up at all, and claimed to have clashed with the cast and crew for that movie. But regardless, as a result, it halted the production of the movie a lot of times. But either way, while I get having to condense some of the history of Queen and Freddie Mercury, it's still a watered down, boring version of the real authentic history that, in some cases, gives a false impression of how some of the events actually played out. That's all I'll say about that movie, really.
Yeah, some
And
some of those some of the stories that were biopics usually tend to try to sanitize some of the stuff that happened. Of
Yeah.
course, there's some stuff that does happen or probably did happen in some of these people's history is a lot less marketable to, you know, friends and family or like just people in general, the general public. So I mean, I can kind of understand where they have to be like, okay, well, this really bad thing happened to this person, so we're not going to talk about that. So we're kind
Well,
of
it's
going to
not.
dramatize it too.
Well, it's not even that the person did like bad things. It's just sometimes the person did very risque things to the
Th-
point where the
That's what I
production
mean.
just is like, yeah, they do like risque things, not super mainstream sanitized sort of thing that corporations just kind of be like, oh. And actually, something else I was thinking about, and I kept thinking about it, is like, if directors like Martin Scorsese did the same treatment for Bohemian Rhapsody as he did with Wolf of Wall Street and actually made it rated R, it would be 1,000 times better.
that's true. I will
That's just my
say,
take.
speaking
That's
about
just my take.
directors, one, I don't know if you guys have heard of Robert Eggers, but Robert Eggers, his films, whenever I came across this video a long time ago that like he made a movie called The Witch. So then he made that. I think that was his first one. I think if I'm not, if I could be wrong about that. Don't don't take my word for it. So he did a movie called The Witch, which was very like, yeah, there was a production company, but they weren't really involved. They weren't getting involved with how he's making his movie. And then he made a movie called The Vikings. And then that movie, the studios were really trying to get involved, and that one didn't do so well. And then Robert Eggers made Nosferatu, and the studios weren't very much involved, and that did great. So it kind of matters of like, do we need their help or do we not need their help kind of situation.
I think it also kind of has to do with a matter of content as well sometimes. Not all the
True,
time. But
very true.
taking a look at the Nosferatu type
Mhm.
situation is there's sometimes with you have like the scale of how big the actors are, or you have how familiar people are with the story, or how big the character is. Because with that type of, I'm trying to find the right word. You have like actors like Willem Dafoe, some of these other bigger actors in it. The Tale of Nosferatu is it's 100-year-old movie at this
Mhm.
point, and basically everybody knows that even like almost the youngest generation knows about it, not just because of this movie, but because like people are recycling like some of these characters or it gets brought up in like TV show or a cartoon or all that kind of stuff because somebody that watched it when they were much younger watched it and they wanted to bring it into the public consciousness. And even the director probably wanted to give the same feel of what the original movie was, but in a more modern light. Um,
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
so it really
And
depends also public perception too.
yeah. And yeah, I feel like some of it, the reason why Nosferatu, like where we are now with Nosferatu is part of it could be because it was featured on SpongeBob. And that
I
was able to
was.
get it, yeah, that was able to get it back into the public conscious. And actually, speaking of public conscious and the audience, something else important to consider is that the average person doesn't know all about this. They don't know what's
Mhm.
going on. behind the scenes. But the
Hmm.
first sign that something isn't right is when they see just how much of a mess the final product is. And this brings up how I think the average audience member is smarter than what some people want to think. When they continuously see the repetitiveness of messy, mediocre movies or shows being thrown at them, they will get tired and exhausted of that. And it's the same thing with creators. I think creators seeing all these storms brewing in the distance with things like negative behind the scenes corporate meddling and mediocre media coming out as a result that's being pumped into the mainstream, they are going to move on to different places and different avenues, different independent studios that will allow them to have more creative freedom, whether it be A24 or Neon or posting their own, sometimes longer form stories on YouTube.
Hmm.
And these things are not going to be indie for long, especially with
Hmm.
A24 and Neon, which I think both studios have at least one film that won Best Picture. So
Hmm.
and even if some A24 and some Neon films don't turn out well, at least they were something. And
True.
sometimes, and it shows that sometimes no matter how hard you try to make something work, things just don't always turn out so well like you hoped. And that's just kind of part of the process, really. And that kind of ties back into like what does this got to do with production troubles? When you and your team get your act together and
Hmm.
strive to create something special and good, then people will like it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. There was one thing you mentioned about controversy, or it wasn't exactly the word you were saying,
Like
but
negative behind the scenes.
yeah, negative behind the scenes. So a great example is unfortunately, and I think everybody's kind of starting to see what's going on, is I mentioned it earlier with that 5 hour stream for Doomsday. Is back in I think what 2022, 20 like the earlier like of this decade, they were had this whole big plan of having this specific Marvel bad guy being the main bad guy. They had this actor lined up and everything. They had everything set up for
Hmm.
this actor, for this character to be the main bad guy, for Kang to be the main bad guy. But Jonathan Majors messed up royally when he did or he might have done what he did. So now Marvel has to, you know, change gears and everybody's already kind of tired as it is of all this extra like big multiversal stuff and all this crap or whatever. And they end up like, okay, we need to bring something back to like real people and really fast. What can we bring people fast? Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, but we can't have Iron Man because Iron Man's dead. What's a character that everybody's been wanting? The Fantastic Four. Who's related to the Fantastic Four? Doctor Doom. Robert Downey Jr. is Doctor Doom. They they went too fast into like having this big character everybody is hyping up, but they use an actor that they've already had before. And I get, with the multiverse, you can have like multiple characters be played by like a single actor. But it's like it just kind of feel there's things that does do feel disingenuous about, you know, they can't make up for their mistakes. And like the most that they did after the whole controversy came out about Jonathan Majors is I think it was at the end of Loki. The TVA went out and hunted down all the variants of Kang. So he's just gone. I mean, obviously in the comics, he's kind of a nothing burger of a character
Hmm.
in a sense, but it's just like, you know, sometimes it's that I think that's another big problem is hyping up this big saga with all these bigger characters, and you end up having to pump the brakes because, you know, you, yeah, an actor just messes up. That's
Hmm.
an unfortunate thing. So
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is kind of the main crux with all of this production troubles with these mainstream corporations that they're just going way too fast to the point where they're not thinking. They're just not thinking straight.
They just don't have a direction is the problem. I mean, with the first three phases of Marvel, they had a direction. We knew where they were going. But with phases four, five, and possible six, we still don't know what the heck they're doing. And that's a problem too when you don't have direction, whether that be in production or not in production or in the creative process. When you don't have a direction, you do need to basically hit the brakes and say, okay, we need to know what we're doing with this thing. Because if we don't know what we're doing with this thing, we're going to end up with something that's not going to be liked by the audience.
Yeah.
and that's another thing is taking a look at the more recent Captain America movie.
Mhm.
I like it for the most part. I like it as a movie for Sam as
Mhm.
Cap, but there is an issue with it, and a lot of the people that are in the Marvel fandom that kind of understand some of the writing is that people that there was a specific character played by a specific actor that I don't really want to get into because we're kind
Mhm.
of a little short on time.
Mhm.
But a lot of some of the fandom was like, "Hey guys, in this current world climate, I don't know if this is the right thing to have this character and this actor in the movie." But Marvel still had that character in the movie. Well, I mean,
Mhm.
obviously, the character is also another one of those nothing burger characters. Like, just to kind of to give a hint, like the most I've ever known this character specifically, the lady named after hummus, um, is that she was yelled at by the Hulk. That's the most I remember, or her for like outside of this movie. Not the
Mhm.
Red Hulk, but the Green Hulk. But
Yeah.
it's kind of an unfortunate thing that sometimes like these studios don't hear the criticism and they're just like, oh well, still wanted to tell the story, but it's like you could have had this character played by anybody else. You could have had a totally different character, for this movie, but you chose to have this character played by this actor, even though there's this controversy around the background of this character and actor. But
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
has nothing to do with, I mean, it does, but it doesn't. But you get what I mean. So.
Yeah. I mean, sure, they do have a motivation, they do have a direction. It's called making money. And that often conflicts with artistic everything else.
Yeah.
So, whoops.
Yeah, so I mean, it's unfortunately, we kind of fall into like a thing where there are some people that probably do have a negative mindset about like having characters like her in these movies because they're not necessarily you get where I'm kind of going with that, but like a good reason why a lot of people were kind of upset why this character is in the movie is kind of more of a moral, kind of ethical type reason rather than I hate women, so I don't like women in movie. So it's just like like these really weak-minded men, might try to gravitate towards you because you say I don't like this character in the movie, and then you don't exactly say what it is right away, But that's a different story. So
Yeah.
we are very short
Yeah,
on time, so we could definitely try to, if we need to expand on this another day, we will. We will. So
sure. Yeah. Definitely some things we could talk about in the future, expand upon.